What's up, everyone? Today, I want to talk about the music of Mick Barr. Mick Barr is a genius. I would use that expression. He's a pretty humble, chill human being, so he would probably feel a little uncomfortable with me throwing that word at him, but I'm going to do it. So Mick is primarily known now as a member of Kralis, the beloved experimental progressive black metal band. Been very prolific over the past 10 years. So we're going to talk a little bit about Kralis, but I think mainly what we're going to talk about is his overall arc as a composer, because he's done, before Kralis and during Kralis up to now, he's had a whole bunch of different projects that are basically his solo compositions, his work as a composer. And he has a very, very singular vision, which is present in Kralis, but it's really distilled in his other long-running projects. What he makes is you could say it has elements of metal, of black metal, and 20th century composition, 21st century composition of the classical, quote-unquote, new music strain, and elements of punk, not as in punk rock, but as in sort of roots in that DIY punk and hardcore culture on a deep level. So we're going to talk about all those aspects of his music throughout the different projects. So Mick was born in Connecticut and grew up there in high school and stuff, and then he moved to DC, I think, toward the end of high school, and he became very involved in the kind of post-hardcore scene there, the Discord Records related scene, post-Fugazi-ish scene, Nation of Ulysses, Slant Six, this generation. And actually, fun fact, before he moved to DC, when he was in high school in Connecticut, he actually played in an early band with Jamie Josta of Hatebreed. Not a lot of people know that. It's not relevant, except that it's a fun fact that I like. Anyway, when he was in DC, he had a band called Kromtech, which was a very mathy, sort of weird time signature, guitar, drums, and him doing vocals. We're going to kind of skip over Kromtech, even though they're great, and we're going to go straight into Orthrelm. So now, Orthrelm, this is how I met Mick in the early 2000s in New York, because he'd moved from DC. He was kind of back and forth from DC to New York, and then he sort of settled in New York for a while. And Orthrelm were very much part of the same scene that Z's was a part of. This was my band at the time. They still exist. They're still fantastic. And this scene that was happening at that time, not just in New York, but nationally, even internationally, sort of became known as brutal prog. And that was a term that was coined by Weasel Walter. Weasel Walter is the man behind the Flying Lutenbachers, definitely a brutal prog band. And that other scene, the other bands in that scene that were making really complex, highly complex but raw music, that coming from a punk and noise angle, but with this highly composed sort of rigor to it. These bands were like Upsilon Crux, Lightning Bolt really came out of that, Ruins for sure, and even some of these other bands that were much bigger and coming out of hardcore, but like The Locust, and even Dillinger Escape Plan, I would say, were kind of in the orbit of this brutal prog thing that was happening. So Orthrelm, what to say about them? What you just heard was called Iork Scimitar. Really hard to pronounce a lot of these titles, and I think, Mick does that to be deliberately alienating and confusing. First thing you notice, insane complexity, just off the charts complexity. Now, what most people notice first is Mick's insane the virtuosity of his playing. And of course that's mind-bending, but to me that's honestly the least interesting thing of his work. A lot of people have incredible speed. Well, few have its speed on the level of Mick, but still, I don't think Mick would claim that his virtuosity is his main thing either. But when I'm talking about complexity, I mean the composition. What we're talking about is this kind of melodic stuff that just barely repeats at all. I mean, just really no repetition. You're talking about a constant flow of change. And what we have in Orthrelm is just guitar and drums. That's Mick, and Josh Blair is the drummer. And you notice it's all just unison. It's just these highly complex, non-repeating, fast melodies and in complete rhythmic unison with drums. It's harmonically totally atonal. It has the sort of notes of unhinged free jazz, you could say. And there's really not what you would call melody, but it is melodic in the sense that it's a single line, no chords. And really, I know that Mick was trying to do something very, very alien and cold. There's a really unprecious vibe to it as well. So, I mean, this to me was a big part of what I liked about the brutal prog thing, especially Mick, was there's this collision between, on the one hand, insane complexity and rigor, obviously obsessive hours and months of labor to at least to rehearse this. I assume to write it, although I don't know, maybe Mick writes fast. But you're talking about this deep complexity and rigor and work, but it's colliding with the sort of unpreciousness of punk. There's a rawness to it, not just with the lo-fi recording, but with the sense that all the pieces are so similar in their sound. There's just this sense of like turning on the faucet and Orthrelm comes out. All of this wild complexity and virtuosity, it never comes off as wanky. People who like brutal prog didn't really experience it that way. And a lot of people who don't like prog loved Orthrelm. A lot of people who are not into highly complex classical music were into Orthrelm because there's something about it that feels utterly natural, organic, and just exists. Doesn't feel fussy or futzed with. The thing that really ties this to modernist classical composition, post-war composition, European stuff, is to me just the type of attention that it commands. Really about the form, the way the form unfolds. That non-repeating quality takes you on this journey of attention where I won't say you get lost in time because these are such short pieces, but you're taken on a journey of, because of the non-repetition, it has that new music kind of attention that it requires, that arresting kind of attention, where you're paying attention to time, events in time, things happening over time. And obviously what ties this music to metal is pretty much just Mick's guitar tone. Although what he's playing really isn't what you would think of as metal, except for the tone and the speed. What ties it to punk, other than the lo-fi quality, is, I would say, Josh Blair's drumming. And, I mean, it's far from sloppy, but it has that loose, human kind of feel that you would get in either punk or jazz or just more old-fashioned rock and roll. He's not a metal drummer. So what we heard before, the Iork Scimitar record, that's sort of emblematic of early Orthrelm, like 2001. 2005, Orthrelm evolved to this new level, suddenly dropped this new vision, which was OV, or OV. Okay, this just blew everyone's mind when it came out, because we just, as you heard, it goes from the most non-repeating flow of the early Orthrelm to pure repetition, just trance, absolute trance, blocks of repetitive sound or repetitive riffs that go for several minutes and then suddenly change to another pattern, and then that's that for a long time. I saw when they took a year off and then they dropped OV live for the first time in DC I was down there and saw them do this. This was Z's was playing on the same show, and it was opening for Black Eyes. I don't know if you remember that Discord band at the time. It's like 2004. They dropped Ovi, and it was one of the deepest, just goosebumps. It really was one of those shows for me. And it's what's also so deep is it shows you that, wait a minute, maybe it wasn't always about flashy technicality the whole time. And, maybe the insanity of the non-repeating complexity of the compositions, maybe it wasn't about that. Maybe it was about something else, dealing with time. Brian Eno said famously, or somewhat famously, repetition is a form of change. I think about that a lot. When you repeat something for a long time, especially certain kinds of things, you get into an experience of time that is different, and you get lost and found and lost and found in time in this way where things really start to change. Your perception of the repeated thing starts to change. Also, your attention, hearing this OV stuff live, you would, after a while, you would zone out of the riffs and the notes, and you'd start to hear just the clicking, like one little clicking sound of Mick's pick going against the pickup. Like some extraneous little noise would just become foregrounded. And, it's like being on acid or something where you start to, the foreground and background start to become psychedelically, going in and out. So this is the kind of stuff, repetition being a form of change. This really is ecstatic music. And it makes you think, I guess maybe Orthrelm in the first place was always ecstatic. And this is where that sort of ecstatic, ritualistic feeling really becomes brought to the fore with Orthrelm. So then the next Mick Barr project that's been around a lot is Octis. Octis is very similar to Orthrelm in a lot of ways. We just listened to Iohar Gwendid, which was on the Zodek label. This is where he started to hook up with the Zorn realm. I can only imagine when Zorn first heard Mick Barr's music, it must have just been, I would love to just see that happen, his face light up. But so yeah, Octis is basically Mick and Drum Machine. And the compositions are pretty similar to Orthrelm. I mean, they vary a little bit from record to record, but you're still dealing with pure one line, one guitar line, exact unison with drums, and not really doing the OV type repetitive stuff. Pretty much all of it is the original Orthrelm style of the non-repeating hypercomplex, and has a different quality. As you heard, it's even colder in a way, depending on how you define cold, but without Josh Blair's sort of buoyant, soulful kind of drumming, you get this harsh sort of industrial vibe to it. And I loved just the vibe about Octis that's really punk is just Mick showing up with an iPod back then and his guitar, no amp, and just plugging directly into the board through a metal zone, just SG, metal zone, direct into the board, no reverb. That's pretty raw. I guess I would say with Octis, one small difference compositionally is it seems like he's getting a little more patient with developing little rhythmic, little melodic motifs, little nuggets that sort of repeat and expand a little bit. He does that a little bit with Orthrelm, and then I feel like with Octis, there's a little bit more of this patience messing around with little things before moving on to the next thing. But it's still a flow of modern composition type attention. Okay, Acrolym. So we've had Orthrelm, we had Octis. Now we're going to talk about Acrolym. Acrolym is my favorite of Mick's. Well, it's my favorite of his 2000s sort of wave of work. And it's not completely different, but the ways in which it is different took me to this complete other level with really emotionally connecting to Mick's work. It's less cold and alien, relatively speaking, than Octis and Orthrelm, although he's lost the drums entirely. So it's no drums, and we're dealing with just guitar overdubs. And the main thing here that's happening is he's got more than just one melody going. He's got bass notes now. Long, sustained bass notes. They're not drones, but they're slow bass lines that move. And that does, to me, that does such a different, it takes the music in such a different direction, because the super fast melodic stuff that's happening, the sort of shredding, quote unquote, now it's happening, it's contextualized against these long notes. So you start to hear these melodies as being anchored, harmonically anchored. Acrolym and this record, Anoint, is where it starts to take on what to me is actual beauty in the sense of harmonic gestures, that he starts to, instead of using every single note all the time, all over the place, he starts to focus on little themes. They're weird. They have some atonality, some chromaticism in there, but there are triumphant moments of beauty, and there's stuff that is soaring. I think of triumphant, victory, glory to this music. The other thing is the thing about repetition. Now he's, with Orthrelm, you had total non-repetition and then total repetition. So here in Acrolym, this is where he starts to sort of reconcile those or integrate repetition into this flow in a way where, like we said, repetition is a form of change, but instead of just exploring that as a complete trance state, like an OV, now he's got the flow of change, like the Orthrelm flow of change, and then it will lock into repetition, and that repetition will be part of the change. Repetition's a form of change. Change is also a form of change. Is change a form of repetition? We're going to keep it with music and not philosophical grasping today. The thing of having music that is unfolding in a very modern classical that kind of attention, that kind of wild formal unfolding, to have that and then lock into some repetition as part of that, that's something that it's not just in Acrolym, but I talked about that with the music of Helmut Lachenmann, who I mentioned in my top 10 20th century classical compositions. You should check out that video. I talked about that formal aspect of Lachenmann, locking into the flow and then repetition as part of the flow of change. And that's something that Alex Minchek also really got me into. Alex was the founding member of Z's, or him and Sam Hilmer were the founding members. So they were the two tenor saxophonists. Alex Minchek is now a very successful and well-respected composer of orchestral music. But he got me into that Lachenmann thing of repetition within the flow. And Mick is really doing it in Acrolym so beautifully. I can't. This is another show. Seeing Mick perform Anoint with Tony Gedrich on bass. Tony, who played in Extra Life for most of Extra Life's career. This at Tonic in 2006 with Conate opening for Conate. Dude, forget it. Okay, so Acrolym with the Anoint album, he's taken it to a place of two voices now, all right? Two melodies. Well, melody and bass line, all right? But I'm going to call it a second melody because that's really how this music works. It's like Renaissance music or medieval music. You know, it's the bass line is a second melody. And then you get the record Annwn, I don't know how to pronounce it, Annwn. That's 2008. It's funny, this was on Hydra Head label, Aaron Turner's label. That took the Acrolym vision from Anoint to another level with adding a third voice. So now you've got 3-part counterpoint. And basically, as you heard, it's like 2 very fast lines going and then 1 slower line, but pretty active. The bass lines get even more active in Aon. So, and harmonically, it's similar with the repetition and the change, and the repetition, the change, the beauty. It's chromatic, but it's beautiful, triumphant. I guess maybe I like these 2 records equally. I don't know, Anoint has a special place in my heart, but Aon it's as deep. It's totally as deep. And this is the thing, I'm using these words counterpoint, and but the thing is, Mick he's pretty much untrained. He's pretty much totally self-taught. He's definitely never studied counterpoint or classical music at all. He listens to a lot of it, especially 20th century, but he has no training in it. You arrive at your own version of some of those conventions, but with this completely original personal thing that has nothing to do with classical music, but certain aspects of contrary motion, right? Contrary motion is where one melody's going up and the other one's going down. They're going in opposite directions, all right? You have oblique motion. That's where one melody is staying the same, staying in one note, and the other melody is going down or up. It's diverging. Parallel motion, they're moving in the same direction. So this interplay of those different kinds of motion, he's just doing that weaving in and out, and it never gets muddy either. It never there's so much density going on, but the melodies don't step on each other. They're all working in this tapestry. Yeah. And so with this kind of thing, is it still ecstatic music? Yeah, I would say it has that ecstatic quality as much as OV does. It at this point, it has the density of black metal. And this is the thing, I feel like his mixed black metalness creeps in more and more and more over time. I guess you could say it culminates in Kralis. That's like actually a black metal band. But this is the thing, when I think of black metal, I think of envelopingness. I talked about this also in that video, Black Metal is Feminine. I won't talk about my gendered theories of it here, but my idea is just that one of the key characteristics of black metal is that atmosphere, that quality of it's an environment, an atmosphere that you enter into. It's enveloping. And by the time we're getting to Acrolym, to the Aon record, it now is kind of enveloping. But it's interesting because it's not totally repetitive. So you've got a thing that you could enter into as an atmosphere and just be like, oh, I'm in the atmosphere, I'm in the vibe, I'm in the realm. Or you could be following the specific unfolding of the form, which is a lot more of a narrative thing. It's a lot more of a things coming at you and following a thread. So you could experience it in those two different ways. So now before we get to Kralis, we should definitely talk about Mick's chamber music that he's written for other ensembles. Check this out. So that was a string trio that Mick wrote for the Acme String Quartet. Great string quartet in New York. They're friends of mine. Clarice Jensen runs that. And if you hear that, that really sounds like Orthrelm. Very much, or the sort of, I guess the more, well, maybe you could say it's a little more like, maybe it's a little more like Acrolym, Aon, because it's like the three-part counterpoint. A lot of tremolo, so it is on the black metal side of things, I suppose. And he definitely totally wrote that on guitar. He even has a recorded version that is a guitar version of it. So it transfers really well onto the bowed strings. And, it makes me think of people in the classical music world. I've heard people say that if you want to really, really get the purest distilled essence of a composer's mind and soul and just how they deal with music on the most deepest level, you should check out their string quartets. That's a very classical centric thing to say, the string quartet being the genre of the 18th century, 19th century. But yeah, if you want to really, really get into what Beethoven is, check out the string quartets. People say that. So Well, you could say that about Mick, but he's already doing stuff that's so pure with the electric guitar. It's already all there, his working in its purest, stripped down way. Everything he's done so far has just been guitar. That's been the one texture, electric guitar and drums. And now we're getting into strings, which he's treating very similarly. There are other chamber music projects that he's working on that have been recorded that have not been released. And actually, this string trio has not been released either. But the other chamber music stuff, he's got some stuff from mixed chamber groups, small mixed chamber groups, including piano. And he has a piece for organ and voice. I don't want to leak these recordings because he's going to be doing something with them soon. And I know he's got more grants and commissions and stuff coming in for chamber music. So, and I can tell you that these pieces do sound kind of different. He is treating stuff kind of differently. And it's exciting because then he's spreading out into different textures, different timbres. You're dealing with organ and operatic voice, different colors, so this is he's got whole new realms you haven't even heard yet. So this brings us to Kralis. Kralis is an actual black metal band. So I've been saying that Mick's music has been increasing in black metalness. It's increasing in density, increasing in romanticism, I suppose you could say, and grandeur. And yeah, so around 2006, 2007, Mick and Colin Marston, also of Gorguts, Behold the Arctopus, and he's tech metal royalty basically, and Lev Weinstein and Nick McMaster, Mick was like, I want to do a black metal band. Deciding on a genre, what makes it a black metal band? Well, it's black metal, death metal, somewhere in there. But having actual blast beats takes it to a genre place for sure. And Mick's, I can't tell what parts of it he writes and what parts of the other guys write. I know it's very much a four-way collective thing. You can hear Mick in there for sure. I mean, you can hear the chromaticism, but everything is kind of reined in to sort of Acrolym, like Anoint levels or Aunwun levels of complexity. Not really Orthrelm type complexity. It's harmonically focused. There's stuff that's just minor and stuff that's just major and stuff that's really in an actual key, at least temporarily. But it is, and it doesn't lock into repetition in that same way. If it repeats, it's more like actual metal repetition, not the form stuff of Kralis, as complex as it is with the unfolding, as proggy as it is, or whatever you want to call it. It's still, the way it unfolds, it still feels like riffs, transitions, parts. It's not like a completely classical type flow of like turn the faucet on and then follow the water and the unfolding of events in time, and repetition is a form of change, and where are we? It really is like just a very elegant form of technical black metal / death metal, and that's why they're kings, because they're bringing that kind of complexity but funneling it into something that reads as a genre. And not to mention the vocals. I mean, Mick's vocals are great. McMaster's vocals are so brutal. Okay, so that brings you up to speed basically on the work of Mick Barr, just maverick American composer, just one of the greats. And although I didn't really mention, he has all these other shorter-lived, less prolific projects I haven't even mentioned. He has a band called Oldest. He has a group called Masanek. That's him and Chuck Bettis. He does a lot of improvising. We've done some improvising together. I don't know about any Orthrelm reunion plans, but I know he's definitely got some new Octis stuff coming out pretty soon, possibly even this week. Mick is he's only a little older than me, so we've got decades more of Mick Barr in store for us. I smile just even thinking about him. not to mention his body of work that we just talked about. Anyway, all right. See you next time.